So thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. Katalin, Varga, we've just seen Berberian Sound Studio. Just like to kick off a question about Katalin, Varga. What inspired you to make a film in Romania, and specifically about the revenge tale in that genre?
It was more convenience than anything, really. It was my own money, which I inherited. So it was 30,000 euros. So I needed a country which was, I hate to say this as a Westerner, but affordable. I was working in Slovakia then, and so I needed somewhere quite nearby. So I was thinking of Albania and that kind of region, but it was so difficult to get to by train. Whereas Transylvania was 17 hours on the train, which was actually easier than going to Albania. So, I mean, it was very much location dependent, something that looked amazing and was convenient. Excuse me, sorry. And then I met some actors, and then they all had other actor friends. They're all pretty much one pool of friends. And then I was kind of wedded to it, but it's not any kind of comment on Romanian life. This could equally happen in around the corner, in Fulham. But so yeah, it was just. But I wanted something mythical, and I guess at that time I was a fan of Herzog's Nosferatu, with all the mist, which we never got because we never got up in time to get mist. But there you go.
And yeah, filming that in a language which isn't your own, it's not your mother's tongue, it's in Hungarian, isn't it, in Romania?
Yeah.
But did you feel like being an outsider was helpful to the process as well?
Not for this film, no. I mean, it can be for other films. I think, if I think of Vendors, the way he looks at America, I think that's really interesting. Or the way that Pawlikowski has viewed this country. So I think outsiders do have something to say, even though identity politics is kind of crushing that. But no, in this case, because it was no comment on Romania. It was its own made-up world, which just happened to be Romania. So I actually felt it was a bit of an impediment. Not so much the language, because the actors were really good and they could really help me, and they all spoke English, apart from Norbert, the young boy. But yeah, I just felt it had to be the language of where we're shooting. Had it been Greece, we would have done it in Greek, and so on and so on. To do that in English, I don't know, it didn't feel right.
What was the reception like in Romania? Did it have a big release there?
It did. I don't know. Well, it's a weird one because it's more Hungarian than Romanian. Even though it was shot in Romania, it's mostly with an ethnic Hungarian minority. So yeah, I mean, obviously there were people who thought, how dare this bloke turn up here. Others were not so locked into the, is this authentic or not authentic? I guess like everything I've done, it was a mixed bag of reactions. Some good, some really vicious. Yeah, I'm used to that, but yeah.
And the film itself won Best Sound at the Berlin Film Festival, and sound obviously takes a central place in your films. Are there any other directors who influenced your use of sound?
Well, I say the obvious, it was Lynch. I saw Eraserhead when I was 16 at the Scala, and has anyone been to the Scala here? Yeah. Fantastic, yeah. Because the sound system was actually not great, which actually helped. It kind of enhanced the film. And the Underground was running, the Northern Line was running beneath it. So it really, for certain films, just added to it. I think what Alan Splett did with Lynch really just completely changed the way I thought about sound, where before sound was always illustration. Even if it was great sound, it was still illustrating a spaceship or an explosion. And suddenly you were conveying a state of mind, you were pushing sounds to the foreground that were always either in the background or deleted. So yeah, massively into Alan Splett's work, which led on to people like Luc Ferrari and bands like Nurse with Wound or Alvin Lucia, people like that. Yeah.
And you mentioned, obviously, you shot Katalin Varga on a shoestring budget of about £25,000. But would you say that there are any benefits to working with a smaller budget in comparison to Berberian, which is obviously a much bigger budget?
For your first film, yes. I often wonder, could I do that film now? I think so much depends on your life, so much depends on what you're doing in terms of, are you single, do you have children, how old you are. This worked. I was at a certain age, I had a bit more energy then. It was very stripped down, there were 12 of us. We could just move really quickly, but it's pros and cons really. It would just take a very, very long time it's almost like a debate to have. But yeah, it's definitely something I go through again and again in my head, because when you have bigger productions, there are all kinds of things that trip you up. It's all pros and cons really. But I think so many things that I couldn't have done without people's help. I think the assistants were, without them, there's no way we would have made the film. Aniko, Bordosh, Zsolt Powell, they were from the area. We slept in Zsolt's dad's house, all of us in sleeping bags. Without that hospitality, without that local knowledge, we would have fallen flat.
Yeah, how did they receive you, the cast? As someone coming in, as a British filmmaker coming in, were they really, really happy to be a part of it?
I wouldn't say that, but they were not hostile either. They're kind of your sort of typical Transylvanians. They're not emphatic like the Greeks, where they'll hug you. They were like, yeah, let's do it, let's give it a go. But there was no caution or anything. They were just very kind of workmanlike, and they get on with it. I think what was good about all of them was because they all knew each other. They all had the same training. It was actually quite a luxury. Even though the language was not my language, they all had the same process. And then you get to other films. I remember one film, I won't name the film or the actors, but one actor was like, I want to talk about blocking with a camera. I don't want to talk about blocking. I want to talk about the words in the script. Okay, we'll talk about the words in the script. But the other actor with, the second actor, let's talk about the words. And I don't want to talk about words. I want to talk about blocking. What am I holding? How am I moving? So, yeah, you can get into a pickle when they've got very different backgrounds, very different processes. So the luxury of my first film was they all knew each other really well. They had that trust. They had that shorthand. Hilda at the end, she could spit in Sebastian as much as she wanted. He didn't care. They're old friends. So yeah.
Did you have any highlights on the set on that film?
Well, I wouldn't call them highlights, but yeah, it was a tough shoot. There was 17 days. It was you just kind of got through it. I think what was interesting for me was the lake scene with Tibor and Hilda mostly, and Melinda. Poor Tibor, he wanted to unplug his mic, and he unplugged the wrong jack on the Eddie roll, which was recording everything. So he erased the whole sound after Hilda did that very intense take. And we were trying to rescue it and salvage it, and we knew we were just going nowhere. So we had to shoot his reaction shot to Hilda's revelation, and he was so distraught about erasing her sound. He didn't have to act, When you see his face in those shots, that is for real. But I remember that scene very well because I really wanted this kind of Bela Tar, muddy, rainy feel, and it was like a postcard. Every day was beautiful, blue sky. And the one day where we needed it to be not raining was the lake scene. And Hilda was doing it. I was on a neighbouring boat because it was a lake resort. So my job was more to fend off other tourists. And it started to rain. And we had this was on film. This is before digital, or before I used digital, I should say. And I almost said cut. I didn't want to waste film. But I could see something in Hilda. She was off in this other zone. And I thought, okay, just trust her, leave her to it. And we saw the rushes. I thought, oh, thank God I didn't say cut. So it really worked in the end, because when I saw the rain, I thought, oh, this is going to be ridiculous. But yeah, sorry to say, but I do like that scene.
Yeah. The rain was the perfect complement to that very intense moment on the boat. It was perfect. The descriptions of the mythical side of her experience with the animals, and it was perfect. In Berberian Sound Studio, Toby Jones's character is completely immersed in his work as a Foley artist. Do lines ever become blurred for you when you're working on set?
Yeah. It is, it's something that completely enters your life, and it can be very, very intense. And I think anyone who knows me, after each film, is like, that's it, never again. And then you recover, then you bounce back, and you set yourself up for another punishment. It does. It's a very all-consuming job, especially when you write it as well. I think that's the difference. If I came on as a hack to do an episode of EastEnders or Casualty, which, by the way, I would happily do. I'm not for a minute. I think it's great work to do. It's money, it's practice, but I think it's a very different thing where you're not invested. You can turn up. All the whole look has been established by someone else. So I think it just depends on the film.
And there's a moment in Berberian where Mr. Santini says to Toby Jones's character Gilderoy, "Please do not call my films horror." This is a Santini film. Do you feel the same way about your films? Do you feel that genre can be limiting in any way?
Well, I think my only problem is if it's sold that way, because then I get it in the neck from horror fans who say this is not horror and I've been shortchanged. So if an audience member says it's a horror film, I don't have an issue with that. But I've been in a pickle where people have been really angry because they thought they're going to watch something which is not there. But I got no problem with, you can call it whatever you want to call it, really.
And there are some brilliant absurdist moments in Berberian. Like when the goblin is recording his voice and the witch. What was that like recording? What was that like to experience?
Well, both Katalin and Jean-Michel, who did those things, that's what they do. They still do it, both of them. They're out there probably now, Saturday. They usually work on a Saturday, those two. So I'd seen them in the past. Katalin is from the former Yugoslavia in Novi Sad. Jean-Michel is from Belgium. I think that came from the whole 60s Italian thing where you had avant-garde people like Bruno Maderna, or more famously Morricone, who was originally in Gruppo, I can never say this word, I'm going to try it. Maybe turn the camera off for 1 minute. Gruppo di Improvvisazione Nuova Consonanza, which is like the AMM of Italy, improv and electroacoustic. And I think they were making money on the side, like we all do. I mean, I do commercial jobs, I write commercially, and I think they were doing the same thing. They were doing commercial jobs for horror films. But weirdly, I think their best work is in that arena, because maybe academia was not paying attention and they could somehow do the most remarkable experiments. So, and I think context was so interesting. Like when you go to those performances, usually like fewer people than here. But if you put it in a different context of commercial horror, you listen to it differently. Like you hear Penderecki on record, most people would say, turn this off, this is just noise. You hear Penderecki in Lynch's new Twin Peaks or in Kubrick's The Shining. People think, wow, this is, it just really ignites the imagination. So context has so much to do with that film. Again, the sound of a knife and a cabbage is a domestic sound. And we didn't change that sound, you just changed in the context of it. And so it just evokes all these different emotions of hilarity, outright trauma. It's just this whole range of, which kind of really messes with your head.
And what was it like working with broadcast? Did you always know that you wanted to work with them?
Yeah, I was a huge fan. I mean, I bought not their first single, I bought their second single in 1996 on Duophonic Ultra High Frequency Discs. I was a huge fan. Yeah, no, I mean, for me, it was a dream come true. But I don't know if any of you know, but Trish Keenan, she died 2 weeks before shooting. So it was a complete. It's a very hard thing to talk about, kind of clarity. But I think you look back at your work and you think, you rethink many things, and you always think, oh, what if I did this? What if I did that? Or didn't do this? And I remember the first time I met Trish. She read the script, she was there with James, and Trish said, oh, you should have lots of drumming in this film. I was like, what? I didn't say that, but she could see in my eyes, and I think I put her off. And now I really regret not listening to her, because I later bought this very limited edition broadcasting, which is only available on tour, which had drumming on there, which is really creepy and just really out there, and I thought it would have been really different from the usual Giallo types of soundtrack. So I think that, personally, I felt I was not ready to work with a band at that point. I felt I was too wedded to the things I'd heard, like your classic Morricone, Nicolai Cipriani soundtracks, and I think James and Trish was so talented and so fresh and had so many ideas, and so it was a mixture of, it's I don't know, it's a weird time, but I wish I listened to them more. That's all I say.
And you've got your upcoming release, Flux Gourmet, coming out soon. You're working with the sex education star, Arthur Butterfield. What was it like working with him? Would you like to work with him again, do you think?
Yeah, if he wants to work with me, sure. Yeah, he's a sweetheart. Yeah, he really, it's quite a different role from what he's done. So let's see, really. Yeah, I mean, I don't know what I'm doing next. I've gone back to my writing job. That's my bread and butter most of the time. So for the next few years, I'm just writing for other people. Let's see. I don't know.
I'd love to pass this out to the audience now, if anyone has any questions. We've got about 5-10 minutes for questions.
This mic is so intimidating. Hi, thank you so much. Hi, for being here. I was just hoping you could speak a little to the role of off-screen violence in your work, obviously.
What's the first word, sorry?
Off-screen violence,
sorry,
yeah. The idea that the assault is off-screen, the film is off-screen, how much of that starts in the writing, how much of that is a collaboration with your DP, with your sound person? What is that process like to make it feel as terrifying as it does without seeing a frame?
Well, that was always the exercise of that film to, I think from the very beginning, before I even got to, I think on page 1, that was the idea it was almost like a school exercise, write a film without blood or any kind of horror. I mean, we kind of cheated. There was one scene where Toby battles with this woman, which is kind of in the film. I don't know, it was a very tricky thing because, there's a degree of my, how do I say it? You're trying to observe our relationship to violence, but without being too didactic. You don't want to turn it into a lecture. I think to discuss these things, I mean, almost the same with my first film. I think once you start showing the violence, it becomes very problematic. But to be honest, you can't avoid it. Even words are kind of pornography. If you look at the tabloid newspapers in this country, they'd always put the most sensational words in bold, beaten, I don't know, stabbed. And so that is a kind of porno, basically. So you can never really escape that. But I just thought as an exercise to somehow, not only to, because I didn't do it to sanitize it, because I think to me it's actually, it messes with you even more because you're seeing stuff which is comical looking against the most misogynistic violence you could imagine. So it really screws you your head. You're laughing at something which is actually, why is it funny? And so I think a lot of it is just provoking an audience to question their relationship to violence without wanting to do that. But yeah, it's I'm still trying to. Yeah, I think all these films are just an attempt to put it into words, but I can never quite do that.
Hi, I'll ask
Hello.
a quick question. On Berberian, I was just really fascinated as to why you chose that context of the giallo, and were you really interested in Italian cinema, Cinecittà, the whole kind of culture around that, like you referenced Morricone, so was that something that you had sort of, plotting away in your head and were thinking, oh, how might I kind of bring that world to life?
Yeah, I think a lot of it came from this studio in Milan, Studio di Fonologia, which is not really a film studio. It was Luciano Berio's studio, which he ran with Luigi Nono and Bruno Maderna, who did the soundtrack to Giulia Questi's Death-Laden Egg. Berio worked with Katalin Berberian to do this piece called Visage, not the band, but this 20-minute voice piece, which is really possessed. And I think that was like a seed for this film, and to have that kind of witchcraft as a kind of summoning almost. So I think the fact that Maderna worked with a giallo filmmaker, I was a fan of those films. I remember there was this 2-month Mario Bava season at the National Film Theatre in 1998. And yeah, I remember renting The Bird of the Crystal Plumage. So I did, but I like those films not so much for the violence, it was more the atmosphere. They just had great hair, great costumes, great lighting. The actual violence, I can take it or leave it. That was not the initial reason for that. Great soundtrack, so icy, cold and mysterious and ethereal. And I think there was a poetry there that you wouldn't get so much in other horror films.
And whilst you've got a very British subject or protagonist, there's the great context of the Italianness of the the kind of exoticness in a way of the world.
Yeah. But weirdly, when I was writing it, things were connecting. Like I just came up with Dorking because I used to stop by Dorking on the way to Gatwick sometimes. And the more I read about Dorking, the emblem of Dorking is a chicken with 6 claws, which comes from Milan, which is where the Berio studio is. And I thought, oh, wow, this is so all these weird little connections. I've got to stick with this now. But yeah, to be honest, again, as with my first film, it could be anywhere. A lot of that film is about work. It's about office bullying. I was accused of being xenophobic a few times against Italians, which I thought, okay, whatever, but there is misogyny in the film. There's harassment and bullying, but you don't need me to tell you that can happen in other countries, sadly. A lot of walking.
In Berberian in particular, it's very tactile. So there's stabbing of vegetables and smashing of fruit. It made me wonder what a iPhone-centric, digital-centric Peter Strickland film would look like. It all feels very analog, in the stuff that we're watching right now.
Yeah. Well, you could fit everything you see in that control room, you could fit it on an iPhone as an app. But weirdly, a lot of those apps, or what are they called? Plugins. They still use the imagery of analog fetishism. We haven't got over it, even though everything is digital. It's still, we have that fetishism within the digital realm. It's set in a certain time, certain attitudes to women, certain attitudes to a whole, authoritarian leadership, which actually you still get in some places now. So maybe we could have said it now, actually. But yeah, also I do love analog. Yeah, like my new film, we're using a load of analog stuff. It just has a better sound. Well, for me, I mix and match. But there's just certain sounds you still can't get digitally. Very hard to get tape drop out convincingly on digital. But yeah, it would have been a lot easier to do it on, Gilderoy on a little app. Yeah.